a fun, familiar face to see.
All right, well, we can kick it off here. Thank you all for joining. My name is William Butler. I am the head of membership here at L Suite. I think we like to keep these conversations pretty informal. So before we get started, I think we'd love to hear from all of those of you who are joining the call. If you'd be willing to just throw in the chat your first and last name, your company name, and your title, it would be great to get a gauge on some of the folks that are joining this conversation. And I know I see a couple familiar folks on here, so thank you again for joining the call. Little run of show. First, we're going to hear from our co-founder, Greg Rayton, on why he originally started this community, and then we are going to run through a few questions with Erica, and then we'll try to save 5 to 10 minutes at the end of this conversation. So if you have conversations that you want, or have questions, excuse me, that you want to ask Erica at the end of this, we'll save those 5 to 10 minutes for that. So, Greg, I'll throw it over to you.
Cool. Thanks, William. Good to see you all here. Thanks for joining us on Friday afternoon or wherever you're at. So yeah, my name's Greg Rayton. I am the co-founder of the L Suite. Just by way of background of myself and a little bit on why we started this community, I spent about 11, 12 years as a lawyer. Started my career at Latham & Watkins doing corporate work, so mostly M&A and capital markets work in New York. Ended up moving out to the Bay Area and joined Gunderson. Spent a couple years at Gunderson doing startup work, so representing a number of startup funds and or startup companies and venture capital funds. When I was a fifth year, I got the opportunity to go in-house at 500 startups. So it's like a seed stage accelerator out in the Bay Area. I was their first general counsel, so first legal hire. And I would say that was quite a steep learning curve for me, making the transition in-house and then learning, how to sort of like build out a legal function within a company that hadn't had one before. Did that for about 2 years, then ended up joining another fund back in New York called First Mark Capital. Spent about 5 years then at First Mark as the GC and COO. And that was where, when I moved back to New York, this was in 2015. A friend of mine was at a Series A backed fintech platform, and we had just been talking about how challenging this role is, being a general counsel, making that switch in-house, starting to build a team, really like both of us being in the world of venture and sort of like this world of hyperscale and lots of companies pushing the boundaries on legal regulations and new areas and dealing with venture investors on your board and all the personalities that brings. Like all of that type of stuff was really challenging. And we just, started bonding over like a lot of what we do is not confidential. It's not proprietary to our company. It's just being a good executive and being a good executive within legal. How do you build a team? What tools do you use? How do you be a business partner? Right. So all of that, and we started doing some meetups in New York, just getting people together within the venture ecosystem. Seemed to really resonate with folks. Just creating a trusted space to have those honest conversations where it's not like the Instagram world where everything seems great. You can really share some of your challenges. So that seemed to resonate. We ended up expanding that community. I left First Mark in 2019 and been doing this full time since. So we obviously have a pretty large team now. We've got 80 people here really supporting this. But the mission of the community has always stayed the same. Like this is really about helping GCs do your jobs better. And so that's everything from the leadership side of just being an executive leader, but really specifically like being a leader within legal. How do you build that function? How do you be a business partner? How do you expand your scope? All of that, whatever your ambitions are. So stay true to that mission, continue growing the community, and thrilled to have Erica join us and tell us a bit about her story.
Awesome. Erica, you ready for a few questions that we throw at you?
Sure, let's do
Cool.
it.
I think maybe just starting with the group understanding your background and kind of just how you got into the position of CLO at HubSpot would be a good place to start.
Yeah, happy to. I started out my journey in-house at Atlassian, where actually Miriam and I overlapped when I was privacy and product counsel. Small world. And actually, I think Luke, we might have overlapped at Goodwin, which is where I came in-house from. Atlassian was a client. So already the world is small in tech, as you all know. And when I came into the general counsel role at Atlassian, it was like 2019. We had scaled maybe, I think, to, gosh, maybe a little over 1.5 billion in revenue at that point, maybe 3,000-ish employees, give or take. And by the time I left Atlassian, we were 12,000 employees, over 4 billion in revenue. So just really crazy scale during that time. And I think that sends you on your own ride of constantly having to kind of reinvent your bar and your point of reference. And that was an incredible journey for me. And I knew I wanted to do more than one journey. And so when I was approaching kind of the 10-year mark, I was like, oops, I could be here like 15 years accidentally. And so when the HubSpot call came along, it's a team I had really admired. I wanted to learn a little slightly different vertical. I was the right, timing for me. And so that's where I've, sort of continued my career path. And I think you probably don't want to be bouncing around companies a ton. So I'm glad like this is only my second public company. And yet, like when you come into a new company, one of the things that's very apparent is a new board, new CEO, all that they expect you to know a lot about how a public company should be run. And I was like, well, I have an N size experience of one other public company. So I've got to quickly come up my learning curve and have a way to sort of, speak in terms that helps them calibrate where they are as a public company and their board practices and everything else, without actually having been at 20 different publicly traded companies. So I found L Suite to be super helpful in giving credibility and just a data set in that regard. But we can get into that more. That's my journey.
Awesome. Yeah, appreciate it. And you've been involved. We were talking in our pre-call little prep that you've been involved with L Suite for a couple years now. I think it's always interesting for people who are considering joining the community to understand how our members utilize our platform to help their day-to-day role. And you mentioned it helping with a few novel issues that you've had, like moving up market in our initial conversation. Would you just touch on, how do you use the L Suite platform in your day-to-day role?
Yeah, I think it's really unique. So there's sort of the like in-person network, which has its own magic to it. And then the platform I think is also brilliant because what I have found is I need a place for my team to be able to go and scale themselves to. And there just aren't forums where you find a lot of lawyers confidently and safely talking openly about issues. Certainly not going to go to Reddit and find it. And so I found that the L Suite platform is helpful to, sort of start to scope a problem that may be a case of first impression for us. And sure, I could drum up my network and connect them with the right teams, et cetera. But oftentimes the more scalable approach is for them to go and, put the request out there. And we've had a couple issues that have come up. One, it's a great place to screen for outside counsel recommendations, but also if you are receiving any litigation or seemingly unreasonable requests from outside counsel, it's a great place to sort of pulse check. And more often than not, people will say, yeah, I've been down this path. Let me give you some tips on how to engage in this specific area. So it's just a great channel check in that regard. I found it also gets my team thinking more resourcefully in terms of benchmarking. And so, not only is your job to go find the right answer, but how do you leverage the breadth of resources to make sure that it's a current sort of, market current answer. We have an issue where HubSpot is largely SMB, and we have an opportunity to move up market in to serve NATO, which is kind of like at this weird tier that I had never heard about before, that sort of sub FedRAMP, because I knew we weren't going to go invest in FedRAMP. And the business was looking to us to sort of say, like, can we go do this? Can you help us size the business case? And so the platform became a huge advantage, just to go and say, hey, there's plenty of enterprise companies on this platform that sell into customers much larger than us. Can you help us understand what t-shirt sizing a NATO, qualification would be? And we got, a number of outreach there where people helped us to do that. So I've just found it to be a really helpful way to come up the learning curve quickly in a credible way. but in a way also that doesn't have me on the front lines doing all of the picking up the phone, connecting my team, and that is lift in and of itself. So it's a really cool thing that you all have built.
Appreciate it. Yeah, and then on that same tangent, you've been able to you're very active in our in-person private dinners and our conferences. And when we had our initial conversation, you talked about a specific story on how attending those gave you a lot of levity in understanding how your board operates compared to some other boards. Would you mind just sharing that story with the group?
Yeah, I will start by caveating. I'm at a stage in life where I have a 20-month-old and a 3.5-year-old. So my bar for spending time outside the house, not going to bed at 7:30 p.m. is high. Like the event value has to be high. So I have found L Suite has made my short list of when they have events. I'm like, okay, I will go to that dinner. But I think even more so this particular moment, I'm sure you've all felt it, just given AI, the market disruption, managing investor sentiment. It is, a whole new set of rules, and having it sort of puts everybody, resets their playing field, and having a strong network that you can lean on to both bring benchmark and insights back to your executive team with credibility and say, like, this is what others are struggling with, but also to bounce off of peers. Are you guys going through the same thing? Like, how are you navigating this? How are you preparing for things? It also gives you a pulse on things. So I'll give an example. Like last year, I went to an in-person 2-day offsite event that was awesome. And at the time, the agenda was being put together and it was sort of helping shape it with L Suite. No one wanted to talk about activists. Like it was like, on the list, and everybody, like, no one voted for it as a topic. This year, activism is like at the top of the list, because every board is turning to a public company, GSC or CLO, and going, well, how do we prepare just in case for hostile takeover activism, et cetera, because it's just a real thing in the water right now. And that just helps things stay current. So that's just like an of this moment piece that I have found very useful to stay in syncopation with my peers. More generally, even there's just like at these in-person events, there's topics that you can sort of wade into that you just probably wouldn't even on the message board, that feels, very intimate and secure. And at the time, we'd actually come into the dinner we're on a totally different topic. And I had just joined Hubspot, again, N size of 2 at this point, a publicly traded company board that I was working with. And we were going through the board evaluation process. And I was working with a new board chair, new nom-gov chair. And my sense was this was like a process unlike any I had seen before, but I was like, maybe we just didn't run a very good process at Atlassian. And so I at some point during the dinner, something came up about board surveys. And I said, hey, can I run something past all of you? Like, here's how our survey process works. And it was very helpful because very quickly people were like, why would you run it like that? Or what would be the point of that? Or that feels very heavy-handed. And of course, like, I'm taking that back diplomatically to the chair and to the nom-gov chair, but it gave me a very compelling, like party line to bring back, to be like, hey, I've got 20 or so public company SaaS peers. No one else does it this way. I'm not saying we don't have to, but like that's just a very compelling place to start from, rather than I've never seen it done this way before. And so I think that credibility, just in those moments, it's just of exponential value, and you only get it in those settings where everybody feels comfortable sort of sharing more openly.
Amazing. Thanks for that. And then last two questions for you, and then we'll open it up to the group. So if anybody is brave enough to unmute themselves in a couple minutes and ask Erica a question, we'll open that up to you. So Erica, your broader team is also involved in our deputy and counsel communities. And I think it's always interesting to hear the value that larger companies get from getting their full teams involved in the community. One thing that you specifically mentioned in our previous conversation was how important benchmarking is. Could you just touch on that a little bit for the group?
Yeah, I think I'll give you a two for William, which is that I think that there's value in getting your deputy or your next bench involved in two ways. One, Um, and I'm sure a lot of you feel this. So much of the value that you add in-house and that you want your in-house team to add is not actually the getting to the right answer or the design, but how do you operationalize it? And so for us right now at HubSpot, we're at a moment where we're starting to nudge more up market. We need to split our ELA terms. It's something I've done before, but what I actually want is not for my deputy to come and say, okay, Erica, how do I do this at every stage? But go benchmark and learn from peers. Go develop the skill set to say, like, and in fact, you'll probably bring knowledge back I didn't even know. But like to have that muscle to go, I've talked to these 4 companies that have gone through this transformation. Here's how they did it. Here's the vendors that they use. Here's the things we need to watch out for. And that's outside of like what any outside counsel is going to give you or PLI or anything else. And so I found that to be a very helpful way to push them to build their operating skill, but giving them a resource to deploy along the way. The second area, which is kind of like a freebie with that, but I'm sure all of you go through the challenge of having high performers on your team and wanting to give them growth and motivation and giving them an area where they can build out a network and have a presence and have events around being, deputy general counsel of XYZ and have peers is like a very compelling thing to demonstrate growth in them when maybe promotion or compensation is not always available as a lever.
Awesome. And then the last one for you, I think people are always curious on how members of the community specifically do this, but how do you personally justify or make room in your legal budget for L Suite?
I don't have a huge issue making this case. And I guess part of it's because I make room for it, but I know the extensibility that it offers. So, I cannot afford to hire I'll just go with an example. I had a VP legal commercial that has done all 5 things, on the bingo card that I want them to have done. Like maybe they're only going to have done 3. But I'm not going to hire 2 people, and I can make them very effective in rounding out their skill set by using L Suite as a way to sort of extend their skill set and develop it without me having to spend all of the calories and the time in doing so. So that's how I view it. I view it almost like as an extensibility tool from a skill set perspective that then they can develop. It also saves a lot of time and energy, and there have definitely been savings that we've realized just in benchmarking on outside counsel. Fee renewals come around. People want to know, like, who else is getting hit up for the 12% fee increase on law firms that are supposedly supposed to be more efficient with AI, and yet the billing rates keep going up, and the associates are still doing diligence. So that's just like that's part of the overhead of our job, and I find that is a really helpful benchmarking tool as well, and helps us, credibly sort of draw the line where our budgets don't need to be bloated beyond what it is.
Awesome. Well, those are the questions that we had written down for Erica. We did get a couple questions submitted from attendees before this call, but I would love to just open it up to the group right now. If anybody wants to ask Erica a question, I think she'd be more than happy to give any insights on either her L Suite experience or just legal expertise in general.
So I'll speak up. Hi, Erica. Thank you for presenting. I'm considering joining, and it's really tough for me because number one, I'm not a joiner because I don't have the time. And I have in the past joined all kinds of groups and spent a lot of money and then never took advantage of it. So how often do you use L Suite in terms of for legal queries or to support what it is that you're doing? Thank you. Oh, and by the way, it's my name is Marion Odensford. I'm the Chief Legal and Administrative Officer at OptimizeRx, another publicly traded company.
Awesome. Well, I'll answer your question pointedly, Marion, which may not be the question William or Greg likes. But if you're only going to seek to sort of query legal rules, I think there are better single purpose tools for that. So just to like, if that were the only value that L Suite offers.
No, so I was just saying, sorry, and I may not have articulated this. Like, how much do you use L Suite for to bolster your legal knowledge, your legal team, just generally? Is it, do you tap into L Suite? How regularly do you tap into L Suite? And do you find that whether it's through the meetings, the in-person meetings, or through just reaching out to the community as a whole, how
Mhm.
often do you use them, and what value do you think you get from that?
Yeah. Okay. So I think there's a couple different angles to look at this from. First, from a poll perspective of the platform itself, I probably look at the digest on a weekly basis. It's one of the things that I flip through just to keep myself sort of like, what is everybody talking about? What are my peers talking about? Make sure I don't miss anything. And that's super easy to do because the digest just comes and then it's like, here's the hot topics, and you can kind of click into things. And it was interesting because we just had the chief legal officer for Glean come to our team setting, which, by the way, I know through this group, to do a hackathon with our team because we've gone all in on Glean for a solution. And then I opened up the digest, and Michael's in there asking questions about something, and I was like, "Oh, Michael's smart. Like, what is he asking about? Is it something that I need to be following? Is there a trend that I'm not catching?" So there's a poll that I do probably on a weekly basis, and I imagine a lot of my team does the same thing, where they're sort of passively looking at the digest to kind of understand what is current in this specific tech vertical, which I find much more helpful than other digests because it's such a specific like sort of vertical space that it's probably going to be around the hoop of what you're looking at in software. The other way is pushing content to the platform, and I would say my team probably does that on a monthly basis. Any one of us that has access, just in terms of whatever projects we're working on. And then the in-person events, I think, are super invaluable. And from those, I'll probably attend an in-person event once a quarter, give or take, which may be like high for the average person. But I think the knock-on effect is you have that Rolodex so fresh and handy, and you've had touch points that don't make you look user friendly when you reach out. Meaning like when I can use you, I reach out. Like you sort of are like, hey, we had this conversation ongoing. Can I pick your brain on it? So that's how I leverage it, and it's a pretty healthy surface area, I think, that gets utilized for me personally. And I think my team.
And just to follow, I apologize for taking up the time, but given all of us have such limited time, do you feel as though you have to like commit to yourself to use this platform, and even set aside time to look at the whether weekly on a monthly basis? I struggle with the time.
Yeah.
As much as I would love to do all the things that you've suggested, like I can't even get through the day without, you know, all the meetings that my company sets up.
Yeah. I think this is like where the stickiness, good product design stickiness comes in.
Yeah, yeah, that's my question, really. Yeah. So,
I don't consciously have a block on my calendar that's like look at L Suite, but when it comes through my inbox, it is one of the emails that I click on regularly, which probably is a testament to the value of the content just over time that keeps me coming back.
super. Thank you very much. Thanks for your time.
Thank you for the question, Marion. Appreciate it. I have
I have a
about
question.
3 minutes left here, so if anybody else wants to chime in with one or two more questions.
I have one, if I may. Hi, I'm Sochi Artiaga. Thank you, Erica, and everybody else for being here. This is really helpful. The question I have is about so I am on the L Suite and I use it as well. I'm wondering if you have any advice for how to. I find just sort of wildly different responses, right? And of course, there's a spectrum of risk tolerances that we all have as GCs and what have you, and as does your client. And so you're looking for particular people that are like-minded for the advice that you'd follow. No, I don't want to pay for one of those SEPA lawsuits. I'd rather fight, those types of things. Do you have strategies for, are there people you follow, or do you have subgroups within that are just sort of the people whose advice you sort of go to first?
Mm. For me personally, probably not in the digital format. And I know exactly what you're referring to, where I'll scan stuff sometimes and I'm like, you're not my people, like in terms of what I'm trying to solve for. And that's no disrespect. It's just like you're clearly at a different risk calibration. So I know what you mean. And I tend to follow that more for trending topics and then dropping So I don't have a specific subgroup that I rely on within that. What I will say is the in-person events have given me kind of my specific subgroup that I know based on, okay, you also have a founder-led company, you also are in this, public space, you also have like things similarly about the world. That becomes my sort of cohort then that I will tap for more specific questions around things. So I find that to be sort of the more natural way that that's come to life for me.
Thank you.
Well, Erica, you got time for maybe one more question? Awesome.
I've got a question. All right, so I'm also an L Suite user. My whole team uses L Suite. I get a lot of value out of the stuff that's on the platform. Where I struggle, and I attend events probably not as frequently as once a quarter, but maybe once every 6 months, is keeping those connections alive between events. And there's just sort of like being plopped in a room with a bunch of people. There's not the natural filter of like, I see what you're writing on L Suite or I see what you're contributing. How do you find your people and figure out like where you can like harness those relationships? Like I can do it very organically in my network from work experiences, but I have a harder time with L Suite just because we're just a community of lawyers. How do you approach that? How do you think about that?
So I wonder too, I'll share, I think there's kind of different formats of events. I really like the dinners, especially, and I don't know if everybody's had this experience, but maybe Greg and William, this is a note to take. The most effective ones, and I feel this is a trend that's helping in format, are when we get down to business. So meaning like there's a little bit of socializing, but at the end of the day, like the worst events are like when you show up and everybody just socializes for 60 minutes and then like in the last 20 minutes you actually talk about something you needed the insider answer to. So I think the dinners that have been intentionally curated with topics, and there's somebody driving those, are really effective. And then there's natural knock-on effects from there. But the other way, Miriam, that I've like sort of leveraged kind of keeping warm some relationships, even if there's not like a sincere, without being like inauthentic about curating things, is to ask to connect our team members. And, oftentimes it's like, hey, I have this person on my team, like I'd really like them to develop more in like building their own network or taste for something. Like, can we, get them together for coffee? Or we did one thing where we hosted, I think on the corporate side, like a small group of corporate DGCs and had the DGCs kind of like organize it and run it. So I think that's just a way to like build your team's instinct. And it also, it sort of keeps the relationship warm of like, of course, let me connect you with so-and-so on my team. And it's like a low lift thing for that person's time. So that's how I've used it before, where I feel like there's a really valuable cultural connection to keep, but there may not be something immediate that I have to ask of them.
Well, thank you.
And thank you for the question. I want to be sensitive of everyone's time here on a holiday weekend, so we're going to wrap here. But Erica, thank you so much for all of your delightful answers. We really appreciate it. If any of you have any other questions after this call, I think I've invited most of you here, so feel free to shoot me an email. But thank you all for joining and have a great holiday weekend.
Likewise. Good to see everyone.
Thank you, Erica. Thanks, William.
You.